Welcome to the Sagebrush Trail, stories of the West, from the frontier to the Yukon. I'm Mardell, reading The Virginian by Owen Wister. The Virginian, Chapter 4. Deep into Cattle Land. Morning had been for some while astir in Medicine Bow, before I left my quilts. The new day and its doings began around me in the store, chiefly at the grocery counter. Dry goods were not in great request. The early rising cowboys were off again to their work, and those to whom their night's holiday had left any dollars were spending these for tobacco or cartridges or canned provisions for the journey to their distant camps. Sardines were called for, and potted chicken and deviled ham, a sophisticated nourishment at first sight for these sons of the sagebrush, but portable ready-made food plays of necessity a great part in the opening of a new country. These picnic pots and cans were the first of her trophies that civilization dropped upon Wyoming's virgin soil. The cowboy is now gone to worlds invisible. The wind has blown away the white ashes of his campfires, but the empty sardine box lies rusting over the face of the western earth. So through my eyes half closed, I watched the sale of these tins and grew familiar with the ham's inevitable trademark, that label with the devil in his horns and hoofs and tail very pronounced, all colored a sultry, prodigious scarlet. And when each horseman had made his purchase, he would trail his spurs over the floor, and presently the sound of his horse's hoofs would be the last of him. Through my dozing attention came various fragments of talk, and sometimes useful bits of knowledge. For instance, I learned the true value of tomatoes in this country. One fellow was buying 2 cans of them. "Meadow Creek dry already," commented the proprietor. "Been dry 10 days, the young cowboy informed him, and it appeared that along the road he was going, water would not be reached much before sundown, because this Meadow Creek had ceased to run. His tomatoes were for drink, and thus they have refreshed me many times since." "No beer?" suggested the proprietor. The boy made a shuddering face. "Don't say its name to me," he exclaimed. "I couldn't hold my breakfast down." He rang his silver money upon the counter. "I've swore off for 3 months," he stated. "I'm going to be pure as the snow." And away he went jingling out of the door to ride 75 miles. 3 more months of hard, unsheltered work, and he would ride into town again with his adolescent blood crying aloud for its own. "I'm obliged," said a new voice, rousing me from a new doze. "She's easier this morning since the medicine." This was the engineer whose sick wife had brought a hush over Medicine Bow's rioting. "I'll give her them flowers soon as she wakes," he added. "Flowers?" repeated the proprietor. "You didn't leave that bunch at our door?" "Oh, wished I'd thought to do it." "She likes to see flowers," said the engineer, and he walked out slowly with his thanks unachieved. He returned at once with the Virginian, for in the band of the Virginian's hat were 2 or 3 blossoms. "It don't need mentioning," the Southerner was saying, embarrassed by any expression of thanks. "If we had knowed last night—" "You didn't disturb her any," broke in the engineer. "She's easier this morning. I'll tell her about them flowers." "Why, don't need mentioning," the Virginian again protested almost crossly. "The little things looked kind of fresh, and I just picked them." His eye now fell upon me where I lay upon the counter. "I reckon breakfast will be getting through," he remarked. I was soon at the wash trough. It was only 6:30, but many had been before me. One glance at the roller towel told me that. I was afraid to ask the landlady for a clean one, and so I found a fresh handkerchief and accomplished a sparing toilet. In the midst of this, the drummers joined me one by one, and they used the degraded towel without hesitation. In a way, they had the best of me. Filth was nothing to them, the latest risers in Medicine Bow. We sat at breakfast together, and they essayed some light familiarities with the landlady. But these experiments were failures. Her eyes did not see, nor did her ears hear them. She brought the coffee and the bacon with a sedateness that propriety itself could scarce have surpassed. Yet impropriety lurked noiselessly all over her. You could not have specified how. It was interblended with her sum total. Silence was her apparent habit and her weapon, but the American drummer found that she could speak to the point when need came for this. During the meal he had praised her golden hair. It was golden indeed, and worth a high compliment, but his kind displeased her. She had let it pass, however, with no more than a cool stare. But on taking his leave he came to pay for the meal, and he pushed it too far. "Pity this must be our last," he said, and as it brought no answer, "Ever travel?" he inquired. "Where I go, there's room for a pair of us." "Then you'd better find another jackass," she replied quietly. I was glad that I had not asked for a clean towel. From the commercial travelers I now separated myself and wandered alone in pleasurable aimlessness. It was 7 o'clock. Medicine Bow stood voiceless and unpeopled. The cowboys had melted away. The inhabitants were indoors pursuing the business or the idleness of the forenoon. Visible motion there was none. No shell upon the dry sands could lie more lifeless than Medicine Bow. Looking in at the store, I saw the proprietor sitting with his pipe extinct. Looking in at the saloon, I saw the dealer dealing dumbly to himself. Up in the sky there was not a cloud, nor a bird, and on the earth the lightest straw lay becalmed. Once I saw the Virginian at an open door, where the golden-haired landlady stood talking with him. Sometimes I strolled in the town, and sometimes out on the plain. I lay down with my daydreams in the sagebrush. Pale herds of antelope were in the distance, and nearby the demure prairie dogs sat up and scrutinized me. Steve Trampas, the riot of horsemen, my lost trunk, Uncle Hughie with his abortive brides, all things merged in my thoughts in a huge, delicious indifference. It was like swimming slowly at random in an ocean that was smooth, and neither too cool nor too warm. And before I knew it, 5 lazy, imperceptible hours had gone thus. There was the Union Pacific train coming as if from shores forgotten. Its approach was silent and long drawn out. I easily reached town and the platform before it had finished watering at the tank. It moved up, made a short halt. I saw my trunk come out of it, and then it moved away silently as it had come, smoking and dwindling into distance unknown. Beside my trunk was one other, tied extravagantly with white ribbon. The fluttering bows caught my attention, and now I suddenly saw a perfectly new sight. The Virginian was further down the platform, doubled up with laughing. It was good to know that with sufficient cause he could laugh like this. A smile had thus far been his limit of external mirth. Rice now flew against my hat, and hissing gusts of rice spouted on the platform. All the men left in Medicine Bow appeared like magic, and more rice choked the atmosphere. Through the general clamor, a cracked voice said, "Don't hit her in the eye, boys!" And Uncle Hughie rushed proudly by me with an actual wife on his arm. She could easily have been his granddaughter. They got at once into a vehicle. The trunk was lifted in behind, and amid cheers, rice, shoes, and broad felicitations, the pair drove out of town, Uncle Hughie shrieking to the horses, and the bride waving unabashed adieus. The word had come over the wires from Laramie. Uncle Hughie has made it this time. Expect him on days number 2. And Medicine Bow had expected him. Many words arose on the departure of the new married couple. "Who's she?" "What's he got her for?" "Got a gold mine up Bear Creek." And after comment and prophecy, Medicine Bow returned to its dinner. This meal was my last here for a long while. The Virginian's responsibility now returned. Duty drove the judge's trustworthy man to take care of me again. He had not once sought my society of his own accord. His distaste for what he supposed me to be, I don't exactly know what this was, remained unshaken. I have thought that matters of dress and speech should not carry with them so much mistrust in our democracy. Thieves are presumed innocent until proven guilty, but a starched collar is condemned at once. Perfect civility and obligingness I certainly did receive from the Virginian, only not a word of fellowship. He harnessed the horses, got my trunk, gave me some advice about taking provisions for our journey, something more palatable than what food we should find along the road. It was well thought of, and I brought quite a parcel of dainties, feeling that he would despise both them and me, and thus I took my seat beside him, wondering what we should manage to talk about for 263 miles. Farewell in those days was not said in cattle land. Acquaintances watched our departure with a nod or with nothing. The nearest approach to goodbye was the proprietor's so long, but I caught sight of one farewell, given without words. As we drove by the eating-house, the shade of a side window was raised, and the landlady looked her last upon the Virginian. Her lips were faintly parted, and no woman's eyes ever said more plainly, "I am one of your possessions." She had forgotten that it might be seen. Her glance caught mine, and she backed into the dimness of the room. What look she may have received from him, if he gave her any at this too public moment, I could not tell. His eyes seemed to be upon the horses, and he drove with the same mastering ease that had roped the wild pony yesterday. We passed the ramparts of Medicine Bow, thick heaps and fringes of tin cans and shelving mounds of bottles cast out of the saloons. The sun struck these at 100 glittering points, and in a moment we were in the clean plains, with the prairie dogs and the pale herds of antelope. The great still air bathed us, pure as water, strong as wine. The sunlight flooded the world, and shining upon the breast of the Virginian's flannel shirt lay a long gold thread of hair. The noisy American drummer had met defeat, but this silent freelance had been easily victorious. It must have been 5 miles that we traveled in silence, losing and seeing the horizon among the ceaseless waves of the earth. Then I looked back, and there was Medicine Bow, seemingly a stone's throw behind us. It was a full half-hour before I looked back again, and there, sure enough, was always Medicine Bow, a size or two smaller, I will admit, but visible in every feature, like something seen through the wrong end of a field glass. The eastbound express was approaching the town, and I noticed the white steam from its whistle, but when the sound reached us, the train had almost stopped, and in reply to my comment upon this, the Virginian deigned to remark that it was more so in Arizona. "A man come to Arizona," he said, "with one of them telescopes to study the heavenly bodies. He was a Yankee, sir, and a right smart one, too, and one night we was watching for some little old fallen stars that he says was due, and I saw some lights moving along across the mesa pretty lively, and I sang out. But he told me it was just the train, and I told him I didn't know you could see the cars that plain from his place. 'You can see 'em,' he said to me, 'but it is last night's cars you're looking at.'" At this point the Virginian spoke severely to one of his horses. "Of course," he then resumed to me, "that Yankee man did not mean quite all that he said. You, Buck," he broke off again suddenly to the horse. "But Arizona, sir," he continued, "is certainly has a most deceiving atmosphere. Another man told me he'd seen a lady close one-eyed him when he was 2 minutes hard run from her." This time the Virginian gave Buck the whip. "What effect," I inquired with a gravity equal to his own, "does this extraordinary foreshortening have upon a quart of whiskey?" "When it's outside you, sir, no distance looks too far to go to it." He glanced at me with an eye that held more confidence than hitherto he had been able to feel in me. I had made one step in his approval, but I had many yet to go. This day he preferred his own thoughts to my conversation, and so he did all the days of this first journey, while I should have greatly preferred his conversation to my own thoughts. He dismissed some attempts that I made upon the subject of Uncle Hughie, so that I had not the courage to touch upon Trampas, and that chill, brief collusion which might have struck the spark of death. Trampas, I had forgotten him till this silent drive I was beginning. I wondered if I should ever see him, or Steve, or any of those people again, and this wonder I expressed aloud. "There's no telling in this country," said the Virginian. "Folks come easy and they go easy. In settled places, like back in the States, even a poor man mostly has a home. Don't care if it's only a barrel on a lot, the fellow will keep frequenting that lot, and if you want him, you can find him. But out here in the sagebrush, a man's home is apt to be his saddle blanket. First thing you know, he's moved it to Texas." "You have done some moving yourself," I suggested, but this word closed his mouth. "I've had a look at the country," he said, and we were silent again. Let me, however, tell you here that he had set out for a look at the country at the age of 14, and that by his present age of 24 he had seen Arkansas, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Everywhere he had taken care of himself and survived, nor had his strong heart yet waked up to any hunger for a home. Let me also tell you that he was one of thousands drifting and living thus. But as you shall learn, 1 in 1,000. Medicine Bow did not forever remain in sight. When next I thought of it and looked behind, nothing was there but the road we had come. It lay like a ship's wake across the huge ground swell of the earth. We were swallowed in a vast solitude. A little while before sunset, a cabin came in view, and here we passed our first night. 2 young men lived here, tending their cattle. They were fond of animals. By the stable, a chained coyote rushed nervously in a circle, or sat on its haunches and snapped at gifts of food ungraciously. A tame young elk walked in and out of the cabin door, and during supper it tried to push me off my chair. A half-tame mountain sheep practiced jumping from the ground to the roof. The cabin was papered with posters of a circus, and skins of bear and silver fox lay upon the floor. Until 9 o'clock, one man talked to the Virginian, and one played gaily upon a concertina. Then we all went to bed. The air was like December, but in my blankets and a buffalo robe I kept warm and luxuriated in the Rocky Mountain silence. Going to wash before breakfast at sunrise, I found needles of ice in a pail. Yet it was hard to remember that this quiet, open, splendid wilderness, with not a peak in sight just here, was 6,000 feet high. And when breakfast was over, there was no December left. By the time the Virginian and I were 10 miles upon our way, it was June. But always every breath that I breathed was pure as water and strong as wine. We never passed a human being this day. Some wild cattle rushed up to us and away from us. Antelope stared at us from 100 yards. Coyotes ran skulking through the sagebrush to watch us from a hill. In our noon meal, we killed a rattlesnake and shot some young sage chickens, which were good at supper, roasted at our campfire. By 8:30 we were asleep beneath the stars, and by 4:30 I was drinking coffee and shivering. The horse buck was hard to catch the second morning. Whether some hills that we were now in had excited him, or whether the better water up here had caused an effervescence in his spirits, I cannot say. But I was as hot as July by the time we had him safe in harness, or rather unsafe in harness, for Buck, in the mysterious language of horses, now taught wickedness to his side partner, and about 11 o'clock they laid their evil heads together and decided to break our necks. We were passing, I have said, through a range of demi-mountains. It was a little country where trees grew, water ran, and the plains were shut out for a while. The road had steep places in it, places here and there where you could fall off and go bounding to the bottom among stones. But Buck, for some reason, did not think these opportunities good enough for him. He selected a more theatrical moment. We emerged from a narrow canyon suddenly, upon 500 cattle and some cowboys branding calves by a fire in a corral. It was a sight that Buck knew by heart. He instantly treated it like an appalling phenomenon. I saw him kick 7 ways. I saw Muggins kick 5 ways. Our furious motion snapped my spine like a whip. I grabbed my seat. Something gave a forlorn jingle. It was the brake. "Don't jump," commanded the trustworthy man. "No," I said as my hat flew off. Help was too far away to do anything for us. We passed scatheless through a part of the cattle. I saw their horns and backs go by. Some earth crumbled and we plunged downward into water, rocking among stones, and upward again through some more crumbling earth. I heard a crash and saw my trunk landing in the stream. "She's safer there," said the trustworthy man. "True," I said. "We'll go back for her," said he, with his eye on the horses and his foot on the crippled brake. A dry gully was coming and no room to turn. The farther side of it was terraced with rock. We should simply fall backward if we did not fall forward first. He steered the horses straight over, and just at the bottom swung them with astonishing skill to the right along the hard-baked mud. They took us along the bed up to the head of the gully and through a thicket of quaking asps. The light trees bent beneath our charge and bastinaded the wagon as it went over them, but their branches enmeshed the horses' legs, and we came to a harmless standstill among a bower of leaves. I looked at the trustworthy man and smiled vaguely. He considered me for a moment. "I reckon," said he, "you're feeling about halfway between 'Oh, Lord,' and 'Thank God.'" "That's quite it," said I, as he got down on the ground. "Nothing's broke," said he after a searching examination, and he indulged in a true Virginian expletive. "Gentlemen, hush," he murmured gently, looking at me with his grave eyes. "One time I got pretty near scared. You, Buck," he continued, "some folks would beat you now till you'd be uncertain whether you was a hoss or a railroad accident. I'd do it myself, only it wouldn't cure you." I'd now told him that I supposed he had saved both our lives, but he detested words of direct praise. He made some grumbling rejoinder and led the horses out of the thicket. Buck, he explained to me, was a good horse, and so was Muggins. Both of them generally meant well, and that was the judge's reason for sending them to meet me. But these broncos had their off days. Off days might not come very often, but when the humor seized a bronco, he had to have his spree. Buck would now behave himself as a horse should for probably 2 months. "They're just like humans," the Virginian concluded. Several cowboys arrived on a gallop to find out how many pieces of us were left. We returned down the hill, and when we reached my trunk, it was surprising to see the distance that our runaway had covered. My hat was also found, and we continued on our way. Buck and Muggins were patterns of discretion through the rest of the mountains. I thought when we camped this night that it was strange Buck should be again allowed to graze at large, instead of being tied to a rope while we slept. But this was my ignorance. With the hard work that he was gallantly doing, the horse needed more pasture than a rope's length would permit him to find. Therefore he went free, and in the morning gave us but little trouble in catching him. We crossed a river in the forenoon, and far to the north of us we saw the Bow Leg Mountains, pale in the bright sun. Sunk Creek flowed from their western side, and our 263 miles began to grow a small thing in my eyes. Buck and Muggins, I think, knew perfectly that tomorrow would see them home. They recognized this region, and once they turned off at a fork in the road. The Virginian pulled them back rather sharply. "Want to go to Balaam's?" he inquired of them. "I thought you had more sense." I asked, "Who was Balaam?" "A maltreater of horses," replied the cowpuncher. "His ranch is on Butte Creek over yonder," and he pointed to where the diverging road melted into space. The judge bought Buck and Muggins from him in the spring." "So he maltreats horses," I repeated. "That's the word all through this country. A man that will do what they claim Balaam does to a horse when he's mad ain't fit to be called human." The Virginian told me some particulars. "Oh!" I almost screamed at the horror of it. And again, "Oh!" He'd probably have done that to Buck as soon as he stopped running away, if I caught a man doing that. We were interrupted by a sedate-looking traveler riding upon an equally sober horse. "Morning, Taylor," said the Virginian, pulling up for gossip. "Ain't you strayed off your range pretty far?" "You're a nice one," replied Mr. Taylor, stopping his horse and smiling amiably. "Tell me something I don't know," said the Virginian. "Hold up a man at cards and rob him," pursued Mr. Taylor. "Ah, the news has got ahead of you." "Trampas has been here explaining, has he?" said the Virginian with a grin. "Was that the victim's name?" said Mr. Taylor facetiously. "No, it wasn't him brought the news. Say, what did you do, anyway?" "So that thing's got around," murmured the Virginian. "Well, it wasn't worth such wide reporting." And he gave the simple facts to Taylor, while I sat wondering at the contagious powers of rumor. Here, through this voiceless land, this desert, this vacuum, it had spread like a change of weather. "Any news up your way?" the Virginian concluded. Importance came into Mr. Taylor's countenance. "Bear Creek is going to build a schoolhouse," said he. "Goodness gracious," drawled the Virginian. "What's that for?" Now Mr. Taylor had been married for some years. "To educate the offspring of Bear Creek," he answered with pride. "Offspring of Bear Creek," the Virginian meditatively repeated. "I don't remember noticing much offspring. There was some white-tailed deer and right smarta jackrabbits." "The Swintons have moved up from Drybone," said Mr. Taylor, always seriously. "They found it no place for young children. And there's Uncle Carmody with 6 and Ben Dow. And Westfall has become a family man, and—" "Jim Westfall!" exclaimed the Virginian. "Him? A family man? Well, if this here territory's going to get full of family men and empty your game, I believe I'll—" "Get married yourself," suggested Mr. Taylor. "Me? I ain't near reached the marriageable age, no, sir. But Uncle Hughie's got there at last, you know." "Uncle Hughie!" shouted Mr. Taylor. He had not heard this. Rumor is very capricious. Therefore the Virginian told him, and the family man rocked in his saddle. "Build your schoolhouse," said the Virginian. "Uncle Hughie has qualified himself to subscribe to all such propositions. Got your eye on a schoolmarm?" Please join me next week on the Sagebrush Trail for more Western adventure in the Virginian by Owen Wister.